discussing the cooperation between Russia and Africa in different axis of economy from the point of view of the changes or amendments in the legislation and the creation of a better environment for our cooperation. So today, very many experts talk about a great potential of Africa in different parts of economics. And a number of our countries are working with each other. And now I'd like to ask you if your ministry, the Ministry of Economics, knows how to cooperate better, how we could provide our exporters with support from the government. Take into consideration our experience in the past. Please, I'd like to give the floor to the first Deputy Minister of Trade. So, dear colleagues, I'm very happy to have an opportunity to talk before you. And I know that our time is limited, so I'll try to keep it short. So still, I'd like to comment on a few points on how we're going to develop the export and the cooperation between Russia and African countries. So I'll try to explain it in a few details, and this is a key priority for the development of Russian economy, for the external market, and we have to support the export in traditional markets, which is European market, but also to start working with Africa. Africa is a great market for us with 1.5 billion possibilities, and so we have to deal with a number of different challenges such as food security, energy, and others. And Russia is able to help you with this. Today we've had a business breakfast, and Russian companies discussed there the possibilities to help the African continent and to deal with your requests. As we would like our proposal to be more competitive, now we're developing a number of projects. First of all, we are going to develop a new leasing company, Russian leasing company in Russia, and now we are about to choose the headquarters for this country, as it is very important for the African countries to use leasing facilities for example, planes, airplanes, and cars. And we think that our company, which is called Gazprom Bank Leasing, will be used as the primary agent on your continent. Secondly, we're going to implement another limits of insurance on your continent, and we have some obstacles now, as the insurance on the credits and all other types of insurance in Africa are quite more expensive than in more developed markets. That is why it is very important for us to create this parity between the new markets and the old markets. Thirdly, last year we already started implementing our trade agencies in different countries. So now we're going to open one in Ethiopia and in Nigeria. And we're also thinking about implementing our trade agencies in other countries. Thus, we are now working with 4 agencies, and we think that they are not enough. We're going to find new partners there and take our employees there who could provide all the necessary support for our work. Moreover, we are going to accredit new representatives of Russia in Mozambique, in Zimbabwe, and other countries. And now we are going to have an an accreditation for our representative in Côte d'Ivoire. So these decisions are quite difficult to be taken, and that is why we are now working on actively in this sphere with our business partners. There will be many other differences in our relationships further on. Thus, we are going to make as a priority number of trade corridors. And the most important thing that we would like to create is a new continental strategy for Africa. If talking about separately about all the regions of Africa or about separate countries, the majority of African countries do not have very high credit scores. Thus, we deem it necessary not to support only one country of Africa, but to deal with them in complex. Maybe it would be much better to develop some more complicated and complex decisions which will provide transport, which will provide many other facilities such as banking services, thus introducing all of these parts into a one single system. Such an approach is not possible if dealing only with one country of the continent. So we're very much interested in cooperating with all African countries all together, creating a special scheme of cooperating activities on the continent, including the special trade areas and so on. A very close topic is now discussed in Egypt for discussing a kind of such zone in the Middle East. All these instruments will be very much adopted for the specificity of the strategy of the African continent. And me personally, I am now dealing a lot with the support of our exporters. And I see how the Russian companies get more and more interested in working with the African state, though they understand all the risks. And the Russian business still would like to cooperate with you, and we are eager to create a special support for them to work together with your colleagues. Thank you for your attention. Thank you. Dear colleagues, last autumn, we received the head of the National Assembly of the Republic of Zimbabwe, Mr. Mudenda, and then he said that Zimbabwe would never become free without Russia. And we would like to ask you what you are especially interested in today, what should be made on the legislative level of our cooperation. So I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Mudenda, our dearest friend.
Thank you very much, Moderator. I noticed that no sooner had the moderator completed his delivery, I didn't see a round of applause. And also when the deputy... it looks like we are at a funeral, which is not the case. Thank you, Moderator. Thank you. Thank you very much, Moderator. I think when we discuss issues of the legislative responses and to economic challenges, this is a very broad subject. Coming from Africa, we need to contextualize the topic. First and foremost, it has to be realized that when you look at the global GDP, Africa contributes only 3% to the global GDP. In terms of population, we have the youngest population on the planet, 60% at the moment. And yet, Africa boasts of an array of natural resources of all kinds, which are not found in some countries, including developed countries. So Africa is a virgin ground for investment. Africa is a virgin ground for cooperation. And when we are here in Russia, we want to send a message that Russia should work with Africa, side by side. And we in Africa have experienced political colonization. And when we move in this second leg of economic development in Africa, Africa must guard against economic colonization. This is why I say developed countries such as Russia must walk side by side with us. Come to Africa to invest. Come to Africa to invest in a matter of joint ventures so that we can together improve Africa's GDP, which at the moment is at 3%. Where are the legislative challenges at the moment? There are conditions precedent that we must look at. Number one, we need infrastructural development for African countries to develop. Infrastructure development such as improved roads, improved railway systems, improved air transport. At the moment, in some of our countries, to fly to our neighboring countries, you have to fly via Europe instead of flying direct. And yet, we have adopted the African Free Trade Area Agreement, which is encouraging African countries to trade amongst themselves. If there's no infrastructure, then that trade cannot take place. It may not even take place between developed countries such as Russia. We need energy development. We need energy development. Without electricity, you cannot speak about industrialization of Africa. We need sufficient supplies of water for irrigation to improve our agricultural sector. Because of the vagaries of climate change, one moment we've got droughts, next we've got the rains. But if we harvest the waters, have dams, we can improve our agricultural sector. Now, COVID taught us that we must think outside the box. When we experienced lockdowns, our factories couldn't work, the workers couldn't go to work, even our parliaments were threatened in terms of carrying out their parliamentary processes. We had to go digital. Development at the moment requires that we embrace the fourth industrial revolution. Without the fourth industrial revolution, we cannot see some of our countries moving forward to be economically sustainable, having visible economic growth and development. So it is essential that the fourth industrialization, which rides on science and technology, on improved information communication technology, where the degree of internet penetration is hastened and reaches out to the hinterland of the African continent, development will not have started at all. Relatedly, Moderator, we need to have the law. This topic says legislative responses. The primary legislation that must be in place is a stout, robust constitution, which creates peace, order, and good governance. And as a corollary, that peace, order, and good governance create a conducive environment for investment. Without peace, there cannot be any development. So our constitutions must be strong and must be protected by our parliaments. You cannot speak of investment where the Bill of Rights is not respected. The Bill of Rights needs to be promoted, needs to be respected, and needs to be protected. In this regard, in terms of economic development, no investor can come into a country where the property rights are not respected. An investor comes into the country, makes business, makes profits, and these profits are easily taken out of the country, as the law shall determine. You do not want to have investors that will make money in the country and fail to repatriate those profits. So property rights are very important as far as investment is concerned. And then another area that we need to look at, and perhaps our brothers in Russia and other developing countries can assist us, is the question of reforming our taxation reform, so that wherever possible, we avoid double taxation. And another area that we need to look at is our immigration laws. Any investor wanting to come into the country must find it easy that at the port of call, they are able to get their visas, enter that country, and do business. And doing business means there must be some ease of doing business. Our parliaments, therefore, must come up with legislation that promotes the ease of doing business, so that there is only one entry point. If you go to Zambia, Zimbabwe, or Nigeria, you get there, you get all your documentation. If you want to have your company registered, it's registered as one place instead of moving from ministry to ministry, from that point to that point. So the law must be there to promote the ease of doing business. Relatedly, we need also to be compliant with international law and international protocols, which must be ratified and, wherever possible, domesticated into municipal laws. And another area that we must look at is the involvement of the private sector. No government can develop its country without involving the private sector. And the law must be there to ensure that the private public partnership are protected in law through joint ventures. And moderator, the role of our tertiary institutions. Some of the developed countries have succeeded because their universities have been leading in the issue of innovation, science, and technology. These universities must be centers of innovation hubs, must be centers of industrial hubs, and work together with the private sector accordingly. And in Zimbabwe, we have now promulgated a law which says all tertiary institutions shall be centers of excellency in innovation, research, science, and development. Moderator, you didn't tell me what time, but I will stop here in case my colleagues have got questions to ask me. Thank you.
Mr. Madenda, first of all, big thanks to you for your support for the moderator. Thank you very much for your very important and full of content speech and presentation, and you have indeed duly noted a series of very important fields and areas where legal framework can be improved. Without such improvements, it's impossible to strive for full cooperation. In particular, you've mentioned the importance of developing energy infrastructure, and indeed, it is one of the key things for us for the development of the economy of the African countries. In this regard, I would like to, because back from the Soviet times, there has been a historical cooperation partnership between our country and African countries. I would like now give the word to Mr. Zavalny, who is the head of the Committee on Energy of the Russian State Duma. I urge all the speakers to stick to the strict timing of 5 minutes, because at 3 p.m. there will be a reception for the official delegations, and we're obliged to conclude our session by that time. Dear colleagues, dear friends, in my brief 5-minute speech, I would like to touch on matters of interaction, cooperation of our countries in energy, and I have all the grounds to think that this area is one of the most promising and prospecting up to now. Russia is one of the biggest producers of energy resources as of now, colleagues. We produce more than 2.5 million tons of fuel and fuel resources, of which we send more than half of them to export. So we carry unique technologies in developing the energy sector. We also have brilliant reputation in geological service, petrochemicals, nuclear power plants, and nuclear technologies, carbon-free and low-carbon energy technologies. African continent amounts to 20% of whole land area, and there are more than 1 billion people living there. And over the last 15 years, energy demand in Africa grew by 45%, and we have also trends for subsequent and further growth. And nowadays, many countries experience shortages of energies, even such developed countries as South African Republic, where they face shortages and deficits of energy, which holds the tempo of development. At the same time, Africa carries amazing potential in energy production, which is important both for domestic market and for exports. Africa holds 30% of recently surveyed deposits of oil and gas, and a lot of those deposits have no qualitative measure. There are also uranium deposits, and it acts as a foundation for the development of nuclear energy. Africa carries great potential in renewable energy sources. It amounts to 40% of global solar energy radiation, and the potential of wind energy is amounted to be approximately 150,000 terawatt hours. In the geothermal potential, in Eastern Africa amounts to 35 gigawatts, and the potential of the Congo River amounts to more than 100 gigawatts of power. Back from the Soviet times, Soviet Union and African countries have been closely related in partnerships in many areas, including energy, and these relationships were a very important foundation in USSR's policy. USSR had intergovernmental agreements with 37 countries of African continent. Soviet specialists took part in establishing more than 150 objects, of which by 2010, 350 were commissioned. And with the help and support of Soviet Union, there were more than 30 energy plants erected. The biggest one is the Tasmanian hydroelectric complex in Egypt. Also, a lot of support was done to heavy industry. Also, 3 oil refineries were built, 29 processing plants. Dear colleagues, the main foundations on which we base our partnership with African countries in Soviet times were equality, sovereignty of countries carrying mineral resources, and fight against discrimination in equal access to labor. Today, thanks to the geopolitical and transformation, when the energy demand is growing and fluctuating to Asia and Africa, this is indeed the approach that the world needs. Equal, mutually beneficial, respectful. Such relationships are built by Russia with our economic partners. For us, what is important is strategic partnership, developing a series of strategic projects, joint projects in mining and minerals, creating infrastructure systems, building nuclear power plants. Today in the region, our leading companies are operating: Rosatom, Lukoil, Gazprom, Rosneft, Tatneft, Alros, Nornickel, Rostech, and others. This cooperation can be significantly expanded. One of the tools of doing so is the political support. Dear colleagues, today we have economic partnerships with 17 countries that is legally recorded, and there are also lots of intergovernmental agreements to be signed. There were 37 back in the times of Soviet Union, and we have to strive to these numbers and figures and to the same depth of partnership, and a huge role in this has to be played by the improvement of interparliamentary cooperation, both unilateral and bilateral. Dear colleagues, we are open to such context. Besides, the coming development of the energy, which is so needed by the growing economies of the African countries, demands for development of the legal framework, and judging from the expert's opinion, political law can be a separate field that regulates all the matters arising from mining minerals and transporting them and achieving industrial security. Our experience in development showed the importance of legal framework for each of these industries. For each of the industries, we have basic legal framework that have been constantly perfected. Over the last 2 years, there were 12 laws regarding oil, coal, gas, nuclear areas, and the development of this legal framework can play an important role in encouraging mutually beneficial partnership and its development between Russia and African countries, and this is the work that we have to jointly do, following the best interests of our people.
Действительно, перспективы сотрудничества в области энергетики очень большие, и я думаю, что парламентарии могут сделать многое для того, чтобы эти возможности были реализованы. Сейчас я хочу предоставить слово господину Жан-Пьеру Канефу-Менджива, заместителю квестора Национального собрания Демократической Республики Конго.
We would like to give the floor to
honorables parlementaires, éminents experts, mesdames et messieurs distingués invités à vos titres et qualités respectifs. Je voudrais avant toute chose.
Dear friends, first of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this conference and the representatives of the Russian Federation for the honor that they have given us, and in particular to my country, the Democratic Republic of Congo. We received the invitation for the name of the head of our National Assembly to take part in the work of this conference. Unfortunately, he was unable to participate here in person, so I'm here representing him. So I would like to tell you, to give you his best wishes and his wishes of a very fruitful cooperation within this forum. The delegation of our country consists of a number of deputies and members of different parliamentary commissions. And we also have some experts from different cabinets of the National Assembly of the Democratic Republic of Congo. I would like to give all of my thanks to the organizers for the relevance of topics that they have chosen, including the biggest topic of today's event, Russia and Africa in the multipolar world. This topic is extremely relevant today and of today's reality, when the world is no longer under the pressure of one state. In fact, we can see the development of powers of many countries and the development of the multipolar world. I'm very happy that Russia drew its attention to the African continent, which has been for many years under the pressure of colonialism and of Western countries. I'm happy that Russia is interested in developing partnership relationships with the countries of our region on equal grounds. We are participating in today's event during a very difficult times for our country, which is a victim of aggression from our neighbor Rwanda. Which is acting through its terrorist organization M23. That's a terrorist organization which does lots of different atrocities against the civil population of our state. In fact, their army kill our citizens. They violate the rights of our citizens. They use different firearms, and this violence makes our citizens to change their place of living in order to find another safe place for their children and families. Unfortunately, the conditions of life in these places are quite bad. All of this is going on under the eyes of the international community. However, this dramatic situation, which has been created by Rwanda with only one goal, to possess our natural resources, should absolutely attract the attention of the whole international community in order to take the necessary measures and sanctions against these terrorists. This would create common grounds for peace in our region, in the region of Great Lakes, and in our country in particular. Dear parliamentarians, dear experts, during these bilateral meetings that are going to have place during this forum, the Democratic Republic of Congo, represented by its delegation, will be especially interested in providing better support for cooperation between Congo and Russia, which is our sister country. We hope that you will be our privileged partners. And using this possibility, I would also like to ask you, and I would ask for the cooperation from the Russian state in stopping this terrorist aggression against our country in order to restore peace and security in the eastern part of our country, the Democratic Republic of Congo. This is what we are dreaming about. This is also the request of the all Congolese people. And I would like to express the best wishes to all the participants of the forum and transfer you the wishes of the President of the National Assembly of our state and the best wishes to the Russian people. I wish you all a very fruitful meeting. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Manjava. We are absolutely sure that you have said some important words, so we appreciate your participation. Today, we are also discussing some other issues with Mr. Dumiso Duli, the Vice Chair of the National Assembly of Eswatini. Please, Mr. Duli, the floor is yours.
Moderator, may I greet you this afternoon. Mine is very simple, but let me bring greetings from the beautiful kingdom of Eswatini. We are happy to be invited to this wonderful conference. The Honorable Speaker of the House of Assembly in Zimbabwe has covered a lot of ground. Mine is very simple. I just want to say, let us cooperate in creating conducive environment for economic development in Africa so that we can mitigate some of the challenges that we are facing as countries. I thank you.
Спасибо.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to give the floor to the head of the Committee of the Economic Policy. This is the committee which deals a lot with the legislature, with adopting the legislature, protecting us from sanctions and the restoring of our economics. Mr. Tapilin, please, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. I would like to welcome you all here. Happy to see all the guests of our important conference. I'll try to keep it short and stick to the limits. So I'd like to express a few ideas. So the situation in which we are in today as the Russian Federation, when very many different sanctions have been imposed on us, and very many obstacles have been put in our way. So Russia is really suffering from the pressure of the Western countries. And today we have to get to one common idea that any situation when any country wants to stick to its own independent idea could cause the destruction of all the links and connections. I think it would be a good lesson for all of us that we should remember in the future, that we should work with all of our partners in order to develop a multipolar world, and including here the cooperation between Russia and Africa. It is crucial to develop these relationships without looking at the principles that were relevant in the past. We are extremely interested in paying our attention to the national system of money exchange and to our common legislature systems. And here we have lots of different challenges that we have to deal with. And all of these challenges make us cooperate further. The interparliamentary cooperation that are working today are quite active. So we have about 18 commissions that are actively working between Russia and Africa. So we have quite a lot of contacts that could be necessary for future cooperation. So this could be a multilateral cooperation, bilateral cooperation, or other variants of cooperation. As one of my colleagues has already said, that the government is interested in this approach, that we have lots of access of development, and we have to deal with it quite closely. We have all the necessary commissions to deal with these matters together. Very important moment today that I would like to express is that we would like to create new international organizations, and the example would be the following one. Together with some ministries of the Russian Federation, we have been discussing different matters of protecting the countries against sanctions. We understand that we're going to put a lot of effort into the creation of the air business in Russia, including the construction of new airplanes, and we understand that we will be unable to use the instruments that are now available in other Western countries. So we should understand how it would be possible to create new supranational institutions that would acknowledge our work in our states. So I would like also to draw your attention to the fact that Russian Federation and the Duma, the State Duma in particular, is preparing a new law on the partnership finances, which is otherwise called Islam banking, and we hope to adopt this law during the spring session. And the adoption of this law means that the instruments of the Middle East banks will be available in Russia, and it will allow us to cooperate further with the Islam countries. And we think that is going to be a new approach to our work and cooperation. Moreover, as you already know, we are going to organize a Russia-Africa forum, which is organized by the President of the Russian Federation. So I would like to invite you all to this assembly. This is a very important event that is going to take place in St. Petersburg in July this year. Thank you all for your cooperation. Thank you for coming to our country. Thank you very much, dear colleague. I would like now to give the floor to the deputies of the Chamber of Representatives of Egypt, Mr. Cherif Al-Ghebali. So in the name of God, I would like to thank you all for the possibility to talk in front of this assembly. I would like to thank you all, first of all, and to thank the Soviet Union and the Russian Federation as its hire for the organization of this wonderful event. I think it is very important today to discuss these topics, including the cooperation with the African countries, as we deem necessary to remember all the efforts that were done by the Soviet Union in Egypt. Now we are working a lot in different spheres of economics, including the energy and others. I think that our participation in this parliamentary conference is extremely interesting, and we deem necessary to discuss all of these matters of cooperation between Russia and African countries. Taking into consideration the current situation on the international stage, we are interested in cooperation in economic sphere, and the relationships that we have between Egypt and Russia, including the atomic energy and the nuclear energy. We think that it is necessary also to create new grounds for the development of life and the level of life of our peoples. Thanks to the help of the Russian Federation and due to the import which is now carried out by Russia to my country, and thanks to the policy of the Russian Federation, we are very much interested in developing our economy, in developing our relationships in order to develop its sustainable development. And despite all the difficulties that are now witnessed by all of us, we are very much grateful for the help of the Russian Federation. We are grateful and we appreciate the cooperation between the parliaments of our countries. Moreover, it is very important for us to adopt new laws and to perfectionate our legislation in order to create sustainable development in different economy fields. Despite all the difficulties that are witnessed now, we are ready to go on to move further. Moreover, we appreciate the new measures that are taken in order to develop our economic cooperation. We are now dealing a lot with the adoption of new laws and the perfectioning of the legislative systems of our countries, which are extremely important both for external and internal domestic affairs. We think that it is necessary to deal with sustainable development of our countries for the benefit of our peoples. This is what we do for the growth of the economies of our countries. And so that is why the role of the legislative initiatives that are presented by the parliaments of our countries and the strengthening of cooperation in this field are crucial for the development of relationships between Russia and African countries. Russia plays a very important role, the strategic role on the African continent, and the Soviet Union was the country who founded our economics, in fact. So our bilateral cooperation, multilateral cooperation should take into account all the challenges in the legislature that should be overcome for the benefit of our peoples. Moreover, the legislative initiatives which exist now should help us develop strategic cooperation, develop our economies according to the principle of free economic development, ensuring stable growth of our economies, the development of our society, and the protection of rights and interests of our peoples. We should deem it also necessary to protect the investment for the economies of both countries. We understand very well the situation in the world and all the pressures that are now acting on the international arena. So we understand how important it is to cooperate between the parliaments and between the governments so that we could protect the investment for our peoples. This creates a very good foundation for a future peace and security and the stable development, the financial benefits of our countries. We think that it is necessary to work on the cooperation between our countries, including the protection of the investments, which are extremely important for the development of all the sectors of our economies. This is what we do for creating special conditions for our countries, beneficial conditions for the regions that are around us. Economics is at the basis of everything this society is made on. So, at the end of my speech, I would like to say a few words about the role of the event we are now participating in, and giving you the understanding that how much it is important to come here and speak before this wonderful audience. Thank you.
Dear colleagues, Russian academic foundation and its developments in researching new chemicals and drugs and pharmaceuticals allows to quickly help and support our African friends in solving relevant problems of healthcare for the fields that are more relevant, such as Ebola fever, dengue fever, tuberculosis, HIV, asthma, the scariest and most severe diseases here. Thanks to the joint efforts by our parliaments, I think that we will be able to help to save the lives of people and to make a very important step in developing the pharmaceutical sovereignty and self-sufficiency of African countries. And regarding these prospects of interacting with the pharmaceutical industry, we'll have Irina Antonovna Filatova, member of the Committee of Russian State Duma, on fair trade and competition protection. Dear guests, dear colleagues, Africa is one of the fastest growing regions of the world, but at the same time, still pressing social issues remain unsolved, such as access to water resources, access to food and drug therapy. At the current moment, the median lifespan of the majority of the continent population is unfortunately not that high. The matter of provisioning pharmaceuticals is very acute, and it's going to be even more relevant in the future. One of the key components of the true technological sovereignty of the state is the opportunity of the government to be self-sufficient in terms of providing health care and well-being to its citizens. In order to do so, there needs to be a quality healthcare system in place and the presence of scientific and production capacities to produce medical equipment and drugs, and also trained and educated workers. The Russian Federation already has and continues to develop efficient technologies to solve exactly this set of tasks. Many African countries, as it has already been said today, are in a very serious struggle with a series of socially significant diseases that have acute progression and high mortality rate. HIV, tuberculosis, a series of infectious and parasitic diseases, asthma, and other diseases. And our African friends are in dire need of help that the Russian pharmaceutical industry can provide them. And of course, we understand that first of all, the demand is for drugs that don't have high production costs, that are able to satisfy the basic needs. We produce high-quality drugs and pharmaceuticals to treat HIV, malaria, Ebola and dengue fever, Zika disease, and also antiviral drugs that showed its high performance in pandemic of COVID-19. Some of them are breakthrough and have no competitors in the world, creating multifaceted platforms with bringing in representatives from the national healthcare systems and ministries involving doctor community allowed to significantly increase the volume of information and experience exchange and to efficiently forecast and do strategic planning for the most acute matters. Clinical trials in Russia held in compliance with JCP international standards, after which the registration procedure in the important countries also might take the period of several years and also require very expensive research and a huge volume of investment. This process can be and needs to be facilitated. The African countries and monitoring by them the results of the Russian clinical trials. The data from registration dossiers and GMP standard certificates will significantly facilitate the task of rapid response of the population, the latest breakthrough solutions to treat infectious diseases. And in order to do so, we need to come up with a simplified framework of state registration done on the parliament level, and same should be done for imports of pharmaceutical and medical equipment, and also to consider other protocols in the mode of maximum support. Russian pharmaceutical producers are ready to not only produce shipments of drugs and pharmaceuticals, they can also offer technology transfer to African production sites. Export of technologies is a separate prospect which allows to significantly save on resources in this field. Also, partnership in build, operate, transfer model is possible, which provides for development and construction and launch from start plants that can produce drugs developed in Russia. Preparing production capacities on the territory of our partner countries will also create additional jobs and will bring in additional tax benefits to the federal budget. Having this partnership in pharmaceutical industry will allow to provide the countries with rapid and high quality medical care and will allow to reach a high level of technical sovereignty in this area. The pandemic of COVID-19 demonstrated us quite obviously that the presence of financial opportunities is not sufficient enough to get the required and needed drugs from the Western corporations that decided by themselves who to help and who to abandon. And also these corporations and companies also have sometimes their own perspectives and views on the global agenda. Joint efforts of our parliaments will give the opportunity to efficiently solve tasks and challenges in healthcare, also in other industries such as chemical industry, fine equipment production industry, and our joint efforts will allow to save millions of lives and to help African countries and states to truly reach independence and self-sufficiency from the wishes of the leading economies of the world. Thank you very much. Thank you. Indeed, this is a very important topic, and I think that here a lot of things depend on how quick we'll be able to put the legal framework in place that would facilitate the partnership in this very vital field for African countries. Now I would like to give the word to John Bosco Ikoja, Member of Parliament of the Republic of Uganda. Please, Mr. Ikoja, you have the floor.
The organizers of this conference, my name is Ikoja John Bosco. I come from Uganda, and I chair a very important committee on national economy in the Legislative Assembly of Uganda. I first of all want to thank my brother, Jacob. He actually ably summarized the African problems and areas where we need a collaboration with other countries. We all know that with COVID-19, most of our economies in Africa and world over were affected. And there is need for most African countries with other countries in the world to collaborate so that we are able to revamp our economies that were shattered by the COVID-19 containment factors. However, as a country in Uganda, we want to very well welcome the initiative of the Russian Federation to enter into Africa and explore the many African opportunities that we have in Africa. Africa has greater potentials in terms of energy, in terms of agriculture. We have, like a country like Uganda, we really have a very good arable land that can be used for agriculture. We lack, our agricultural system purely relies on the rain-fed agriculture that we believed that if Russia came in, they will be in position to explore, most especially in the areas of irrigation, so that Africa will be able to revamp its production. Uganda as a country has an open door policy to whichever kind of investor that is ready to tap into our development agenda, and we established the Uganda Investment Authority that has a number of codes that if Russia is interested in investing more in Africa, in Uganda, you can come to Uganda. We adopted a policy where you can have a free access to our business environment. The registration is made so easy with the Uganda Investment Authority, Uganda Revenue Authority, the Immigration Office are all housed in the same area. So the registration and access to doing business with Uganda is really very, very easy. So as a country, we really want to say this is a very great opportunity for Russia to join hands bilaterally with our country, and Uganda with other East African countries have an open market. Our brothers from Congo, Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Burundi, we are in the East African East African community trade agenda. So I really want to thank you so much for having the initiative to invite us as the Parliament of Uganda, and we are ready to adopt laws that will be able to strengthen the bilateral relationship between our country and the Russian government in terms of trade and investment. I want to thank you so much. I really wouldn't want to take much time on this, but I want to thank you, and we welcome you to Uganda in particular, and there are so many investment opportunities in our country. Thank you.
Спасибо. Российские предприниматели.
Thank you very much. I'm sure that Russian entrepreneurs in business will use your cordial invitation, and I know that in summer, this summit has lots of representatives, and I think that we'll be able to specifically talk. And in some of the projects, it's going to be fruitful. Now, I would like to give the word to the head of Bilateral Partnership Department of the Ministry of Economic Department, Mr. Alexandrovich. Please, you have the floor. What should be our economic strategy in Africa? Dear Alexander Dmitrievich, your Honor, Mr. Moderator, at the current moment, the Ministry of Economic Development bears priority significance to implementing our mutually beneficial partnership with African countries within the framework of preparing for the second Russian African Summit and for the second humanitarian forum. Within the framework, in my presentation, I would like to briefly touch on the work that has been conducted by the Ministry of Economy in expanding Russian-African trade and economic partnership. And as you know, following the results of 2022, foreign trade turnover of Russian Federation with African countries amounted to 17.9 billion USD. That's quite a modest number. However, we need to take into account the historical context here. Over the last 12 years, we were able to strengthen our cooperation. If we take a look at the last 10 years, then we grew this volume cost by 1.5 times in African countries. Many Russian companies are already operating. We heard about them today from this stage, and from 60 to 70% of Russian investment goes to geological service of uranium, bauxites, oil and gas, and other natural resources. There are approximately there are more than 30 Russian companies in our Ministry of Economy. We've conducted an analysis of perspective areas. And now we see that we would be able to at least double our trade turnover. And allow me to also briefly tell you about the measures that we've developed for our strategy. And of course, we need to significantly ramp up our joint efforts and to significantly grow our expertise, to rehold the support tools and to give additional resources to our development institutions. A part of solutions in this area we plan to voice at the Russian-African Summit. However, work on strengthening this partnership, of course, will be strengthened after the event itself that will take place this summer. The Ministry of Economic Development came up with a roadmap draft that includes lots of specific measures, specific enterprises and strengthening. And Vasily Smokov also covered some of these topics in his speech, which is strengthening our institutions and export support programs. We wait for coming up with new leasing programs and that will be adapted to to African realities. At the same time, we will take into account the office on how to work with African content, take into account the overall commitment and efforts of every country. At the same time, we understand the importance of direct dialogue and communication with our African partners. And as the Secretariat of Interparliamentary Commissions, the Ministry of Economy is actively using this tool. In its in the presentation, Maxim Nikolaevich and his colleague mentioned that we don't have as many intergovernmental commissions as we had in the Soviet Union. Now there are 17 acting intergovernmental commissions. In December, we signed an agreement on creating an additional commission with Tanzania. Also, we count on the fact that in the summit itself of Russia, in the Russian-African Summit this year, we'll be able to sign 3 additional agreements, interparliamentary commissions, Cameroon, Kenya, and Senegal. And we really count that our friends, our lawmakers from these countries, when they get back to the capitals, will communicate our enthusiasm and our mood for joint work, and will also communicate to the governments who will be able to sign this agreements this year. Another very important moment of Russian-African partnership is the interaction in bilateral formats. Alexander Dmitrievich has already mentioned this. That we have a zone of continental free trade, and this is more than national competences in our Ministry of Economic Development. We think that this carries great importance, and it's very important to continue cooperation between the Eurasian Union and African Union, and also the African Continental Free Trade Zone. In conclusion, I would like to share some thoughts. First of all, at the current moment, there is almost no potential there is no potential for small and medium businesses in this area. To make up for the situation, we need to redistribute the budget of our development institutions so that we'll be able to significantly increase the participation of our companies in profile trade shows and exhibitions in Africa. We have these activities in our roadmap, and we'll count on help of our lawmakers, friends from Duma and the Council of Federations. Secondly, and I mentioned it in the beginning of our presentation, we need to improve our expertise for the African markets, and we need to do by increasing the potential of our scientific partnership, and also need to adapt it to the realities of African continent. And thirdly, we need to revise and overhaul the existing disbalance of the foreign trade. I already mentioned the trade turnover, but I would also like to say that in 2022, Russian exports amounted to 15 billion USD, and given that imports from Africa amount to only 3 billion USD, only by correcting this disbalance we would be able to significantly grow trade turnover volume. And from this point of view, we're also ready to work with our African partners and also try to correlate the existing problems. And to conclude, I would like to support the presentation of His Excellency Mr. Modenda when he said that there are huge problems existing and huge potential, and we take a look at Africa as the new growth point in the global economy for the coming decades, and this is the approach that we build our strategy on the African continent. Thank you very much.
I know that one of my colleagues has something to say about the use of the wind in the energy sphere. So please, it's the head of the the head of the wind energy sphere of the Russian Federation and the deputy of the state Duma. Hello, dear friends. All of us know very well that Russia today is developing a lot the economy and the development of the sovereignty of the economy through very good communication and cooperation between the government, business, and science. As Mr. Medanda has already said, today it's the technological revolution of the world that is going on, but in Russia, as well as on the African continent, it's the time of the possibilities. And the use of the wind in the whole world is extremely crucial for all the countries, for ensuring the sovereignty in the energy source and for having all the benefits of the energetic sphere. And Mr. Moderator has already mentioned all of this. And if looking at your continent, we know that Africa uses less than 1% of its wind potential. Though you have the resources of wind for 60 gigawatts, which is sufficient for the energy request of all the citizens and even more than the necessity of all citizens up to 250 times. So the Russian representatives and business are able to help you with this plans. We are now able to produce all the necessary equipment for the wind energy, and we are developing our legislation as well. I would like to inform you all that Russia is now working on the creation of its own wind generation system, and in 3 years, where we will be able to import our equipment to other countries. Our association is ready to explore the African continent and to share our experience in the use of wind plants. We also suggest you projecting on your territory the financing of your projects and the use of our employees. Moreover, we are able to fix the price of the energy for the consumers in such kind of projects. So we will be able to ensure your sovereignty in the sphere of energy and transfer you the best practices in the sphere of legislature. Thank you very much. I think it's a very important topic for all of us and for our African colleagues. And the use of the potential of the wind and the wind energy in general is a quite perspective sphere. Dear colleagues, now I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Sobolev, the head of the Board of Directors of African Business Consulting, the advisor on the cooperation with the African countries of BRICS Plus. So he will talk about the development of new business projects. Good day to all of you, dear colleagues. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of the second International Parliamentary Conference for the invitation and for the possibility to talk at this historical event. And I also would like to welcome all the participants of this conference, specialists and experts who are very much interested in the development of our relations. First of all, I would like to say a few words about myself and about our company. I started working with African countries in 1986 when I entered the University of Asian African Countries in Moscow State University. And after finishing this university, I took part in the creation of diplomatic relationships with African continent, and I was one of the first employees who went to Africa. At the end of the 90s, I finished the business school and took part in the opening of a new representation of the Russian bank in the South Africa. In 2010, I was the head of the African bank on the territory of the Democratic Republic of Congo. A few years ago, together with other students of my university, we organized a company which is promoting the activity of Russian business on the territory of African states. Our colleagues work in different business structures and governmental structures and know very well the situation on the African continent. So these are a few words about our participation in different kinds of projects on the African continent, and it reminds us a bit the history of Russia and Africa themselves, and thus we participate a lot in the preparation on in the participation in Russian African forums, including the one in 2019, where were gathered almost all the heads of African states. I was very happy to take part in this event in 2019, and I saw very many African colleagues who were eager to develop their relationships with the Russian businessmen. I managed to get acquainted with them and with their ideas. And I think this is one of the particular features of business between Russia and Africa, where not only Russia is interested in developing this cooperation, but also the representatives of African countries are interested in this cooperation, as they see in the Russian partners a very stable possibilities and someone they can rely on. And since then, we have been working for some years, and we've been trying to find them new possibilities for organizing their projects on the territory of our state. We hope to see them all during the second forum, Russia-Africa, which will take place in St. Petersburg. We know that during the years that came after the 2019, we experienced lots of different problems, and both the economies of Russian Federation and African states faced quite a lot of challenges which influenced our relationships. Today, as many speakers said, African countries are more often called the continent of the future, and these prospects are based on the potential of the peoples and countries of the African continent. Talking about business processes, I would like to note that despite the initiatives that are taken by Russian big businesses, they are also interesting for medium structures of the Russian Federation. And the biggest challenge is to understand the risks. We should understand that Africa is not just one country. It's a continent which is divided into 54 states, each of them with its language and specifics in the legislature. So in the recent times, I've been talking a lot with the representatives of Russian business who have already tried developing their initiatives in Africa, though not sticking to our advice, so they did not succeed. And many of them think that having business in Africa will not make them invest a lot of money, as they think it is quite easy to earn money on the African continent, which is not true. Any business project is different, and it is necessary to do the marketing research for each of them. Africa is one of the priority of development of our business, despite the friendship that has been between our countries. We should understand that we are going to face lots of aggression because of the competitive events which take place. including the countries of China and India. Though we understand that this competitivity will be quite important, we should do our best in order to provide all the necessary service for supporting this project at a very high level. And in this historical process, the role of parliamentarians is quite high. They have the role of legislative initiative. And to sum up, I would like once again say that it's very important to talk to each other. I would like to thank the organizers of this conference and hope to see you all at the next Russia-Africa Forum in St. Petersburg. Thank you. Now I'd like to give the floor to another colleague who will talk about the challenges in the cooperation between Russia and Africa and the investments which are now under risk, to Mr. Medinsky. Dear colleagues, dear Mr. Mudenda, I'm very happy to be here and thank you for the invitation. I would like to share one very easy thought with you. First of all, during the recent years that we have been experiencing challenges, we became witnesses of lots of changes. Some of them are quite positive, though others are negative and could have a negative impact on our economic security. Thus, we concentrate a lot on some of our partners without putting our attention to others. So, for example, we can see the growth of the importance of some countries, which, for example, is witnessed in Asia. Thus, for example, we deal a lot with Asian countries such as China, and we are less involved in the African countries. So we are very much dependent on the Asian countries. So that is why it was extremely important for us to reorientate our activity to the African continent. We should say that the export of Russian Federation to Africa is not very high. It's about 5% only. And during the last year, 2021-2024, it grew from 4 to 5%. And in 2020, it was only 1% of import. As for Asia, it's quite different, as we export 55% of our products to Asia, and we should say that it's not normal. For a business, it is very important to understand what is going on, as in the 70s and 80s, there were lots of state companies, and now we are mostly dealing with the private business, who is extremely interested in covering its risk with insurances and so on. And we all see good potential for our businesses, though the growth of GDP for every person is about 0.4–0.5%, so it's much lower than in Japan. And this is not the most important thing. The rate of disability in Africa is about 1,000%. So what does it mean? It means that it's 50 times more important than in Asia. That is why business chooses Asia. We should understand that businessmen are all aware of the risks that exist in Africa. So the thing we should work on is on the reduction of risks on the African continent. And this is extremely important because we should take into consideration not only the price of the workforce on one continent or the other, but also on other expenses that we are going to have. So this is what our African and Russian partners talk a lot. What I would like to say by all this, we now say 4 or 5%. This is not a very big number. Though also we should understand that the income, the average income of Asian states is quite higher than in Africa. I know that some of you have done maths a lot, so you understand what I'm talking about. So 5% of our participation in Africa is quite high, taking into consideration all other investments of the world in Africa. So in fact, we invest in Africa as much as all other countries invest. So what I would like to tell you, we of course should help the poorest, as now there are about 20% of people who are suffering from hunger in Africa, and we have the possibilities to help them, sending our grains there. And we should think of the inclusive society then, in order to make this money be taken to people and not to the officials. And the other thing we should talk about is the diminishing of risks. So we should provide them with different supports and with money supports as well, which could be provided by the parliaments of the Russian state to the African countries in order to make Africa more interesting for our businessmen. We have no doubt that African continent has lots of possibilities for the businessmen, for example, their natural resources and so on, but we should also work a lot with the risks. And in the 18th century, there was an economist who wrote a very important book, which is called The Revenues of Peoples. And he also said that in order to have a really development, we should have the peace and administration of justice. So you understand it all, that we should absolutely work with the risks, work with the experts, that we for now do not enough to provide the necessary support for our businessmen on the African continent. Thank you very much. It's a very important and interesting conference, so thank you for listening to my speech. Now I'd like to give the floor to the head of the of the People's Assembly of the Republic of Dagestan, who is going to talk about the conditions of the creation of Islam banking. Dear colleagues, the topic of my speech is the Islam banking, which is now called as a partnership banking in Russia. So in the recent time, the financial sector in the regions of Russia and in Russia in general has been suffering because of the sanctions of the Western countries. So it has been transforming itself in order to put an accent on the African and Asian countries. Most of these relationships are built with the use of the Islam principles. It stimulates the interest to the Islam financing systems, the sphere that has not been yet developed in our country. So there are still some Islam companies that are acting in the Russian Federation, and they allow us to carry on our activity in order with the Islam rules. Such companies have been created in some regions of the Russian Federation, including the Republic of Dagestan. They work with a number of banks, and they deal with the activity according to the rules that are in their blood. So they don't work with the banking which do not respect the rules of Islam. So we cannot underestimate these rules. The employees who work in this sphere understand all the specificity of their confession, and these banks are also available for the other countries without having any difference, without taking into consideration the difference of their beliefs, and thus they are able to try these kind of services and see how different they are from the ordinary ones. Today, a number of Russian banks cannot have the opportunity to go on with their activity according to the Islam principles. I would like also note that the development of Islam institutions creates competitor environment for all Russian banks. Thus, we hope that all the banks are going to develop even more and provide better services for their clients. We also hope that it will be possible to give a broader range of services for the clients. In order to create the necessary legislative procedure for the Islam banking, the State Duma of the Russian Federation has already adopted the law on the experiment of creating a new legislation for the necessary conditions of the partnership relationships with Islam banking in some territorial integrities of the Russian Federation. We are about to create special regimes for the creation of these banks in these regions and the special conditions for the partnership relationships. This experiment will lead to the creation of a better legislation for partnership financing system for the whole territory of the Russian Federation, which will have an impact on the foreign investitions and a better environment for the banking services. We deem it necessary to further on this law, and thus it was adopted by different territorial parts of Russian Federation, including our Republic of Dagestan. The territory of this experiment can also be more widespread if we manage to have the agreement of the Bank of Russia. We all know that the crises are always linked with the sanctions, as they impose lots of different drawbacks in the development of our business. The idea of the introduction of the Islam banking was also supported during the fourth Islam Forum. Russia is the guarantor of our partnership, and the organizers of this forum were Sberbank and the International Organization of Islam Business. The participants of these organizations were the representatives of different countries of the world who discussed partnership finances in the Russian Federation, the development of long-term cooperation. The representatives of Sberbank also said that the financial sector, which is provided by the Islam banking, is extremely important for the development of the whole banking system. The number of Islam banks on the territory of the Caucasus is very high, and thus, as they are very much satisfied with the services, we deem it necessary to spread this idea to the whole territory of the Russian Federation. We think that it will be very much requested by the business and will allow to create a better environment for entrepreneurship and for the investment in the Russian economy, not only in the region of Caucasus, but also in other regions of Russia. I think that today's topic is extremely relevant, and we should talk more about partnership finances of the Russian Federation. And we think that it will allow us to give an impulse to another activities in this sphere. Thank you very much.
Now we give the word to Honorary Professor of the Russian University of People's Friendship from Kenya, Miss Clara Yuma Amuhai, please. You have the floor. She will tell us about economic cooperation between the Russian Federation and Eastern Africa.
Colleagues, I'm very grateful to be here as the moderator quite rightly said, I'm Claire Mmoiemang, assistant lecturer at Ruden University, but I'm also from Kenya. So I'm privileged to be in Russia and also to represent the country. I'd like to speak about the economic cooperation between Russia and Eastern Africa. I had a presentation, but okay. So I'll try to do it fast in 5 minutes. The main reason why I decided to take the region is the definition of this region is really quite confusing because everyone normally has a definition of the region. So for example, African Union has its own definition of the region, and then sometimes the UN organs, and also sometimes even people normally use it differently. So for example, I have so many Russian colleagues, and sometimes you'd ask them if they've been in Africa, and they'd say no, yet they've visited Seychelles, and yet Seychelles is in Eastern Africa. So I just wanted to explain the strategic value of the region. And as you could see, we have 4 island nations, and then we have the dependencies territories, and then we also have landlocked countries. But the most important, which was spoken with the moderators, was why the reason is more values, because if you look at the top 10 countries with the largest population in the country, 7 are in the region. I included Egypt in that because of the resources that Egypt also shares with the region. So just because of the issue of the population in the region, it really means that this area is really of importance, not only now, but even when you look at it in future. Another thing is that because of Indian Ocean, and Indian Ocean is the 3rd largest ocean in the world, so it's a major route, meaning it connects Africa to the rest of the world. Middle East is Asia, Europe, and even America. What I forgot to put in the slide is also the issue of the Gulf of Aden. So apart from Indian Ocean, we know about Gulf of Aden, which also will extend up to the Suez Canal. And this is important because of the straits that are there and also the closeness to Middle East in the region where there is oil. So for example, I know the Soviets had a naval base in the Gulf, but I'm not so sure about Russia right now. So because of all the importance of this region, what role then can Russia play in addressing the diversity of the region and even to focus for the future? So the second slide, it was easier to use this so that you can understand visualize the region. So when we say Eastern Africa and all the regions, I selected this so to understand that you could see the infrastructure development that is being right now focused in Africa. But you will note that the island nations do not even focus, are not even in the picture. So how can we then be able to make sure that the island nations are even connected to the mainlands? So we know that there are bridges which have been built to connect countries. Why haven't we even thought about the bridges to connect, for example, the island nation to the mainland? And then I also put the issue of the colonial history, because we know some of these projects were, they began behind the initiative of extracting resources, but for the purposes of the colonialists at that time. But what is even striking is when you look at the stakeholders in these programs, there are still some of those who are part of the colonial history. So for example, you'll find the UK, you'll find Germany, you'll find France, but even Russia or even we could say China, they're not even part of the stakeholders in the program. As noted, I'm from Kenya, so of course I will try to project my country. If you go to the next slide, I was trying to understand what how then Eastern Africa and maybe Kenya can play a role in opportunities that are represented, including in Russia. So for example, if you look at the two most important products, which is wheat and fertilizer, you could not, are used up to 2020 prior to the current crisis that we have. So you could note that Kenya trades with Russia in terms of wheat a lot and also fertilizer. But other than that, the main destinations of Kenya are still some of the East African countries. So you have Rwanda, Uganda, and Seychelles. And then for fertilizer, the same Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, and even Tanzania. It also extends to Southern Africa. So the last slide is just to understand what role then can East Africa, the states, and Russia play in this. So the first is first we have to understand, because engagements with African countries have always been that one of pity. So the first thing is the African countries themselves have to be assertive. So because they understand the problems, then they're ones who are supposed to look for these solutions. And then once they understand the solutions, they look for the correct partners in the projects which are of their interest. And the second one, which I've already addressed, is just the issue that they're supposed to be stakeholders. So Russia should be stakeholders in some of the programs that we have in the country. And there's one moderator who spoke about the agencies. So I hope those agencies can also partner with some of the programs that are being developed. The region also has an issue of food security, but the solutions so far which have always been given are just to solve the issues that are current. So how can we then find the permanent solutions? And that's why I spoke about the food science technology. We need to find permanent solutions to the food security. And lastly, because, not lastly, but the issue of payment system, which has affected, and even some of us who keep traveling back and forth, how can we then be able to address the issue of the payment system? And if you could look at the largest countries in commercial banking industry, actually 2 Eastern African countries are among the top 5. That's Kenya and Mauritius. So even Russia should be able, because it has to be in a country where it could have a ripple effect. So for example, if it could start some of those payment systems, we have MIR, and then we could have it in Kenya or even Mauritius, and because of all the partners it has in all these other countries, then it should be able to have a ripple effect in the region. And that's why I gave the example of the Equity Bank, which is actually the largest in East and Central Africa. And then lastly, we need to develop strategies, projects within the regs. So just an example, for example, China once had a deal to have the SGR with some of the Eastern African countries, but the deal, even though it was done within the reg, what happened was that the countries also had their individual agreements. But now what happened is now it's only, the SGR was built in only one country, and it was not able to progress. So if the projects are done in a region, it will be easier. So maybe when Russia is also discussing how they could have a partnership in the region, it could use the existing regs. And then Russian businesses or the business people also just need to be more competitive in the region. So if they are in the region and maybe they are competing with states from other countries, then they should have a competitive bargain for them to make an impact in the region. So that's all I'd like to say. Thank you so much.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you very much, dear guests, dear colleagues. We're now starting the official events. Heads of delegations are leaving us, and actually we have more than 30 speakers who signed up to present, but because we are constrained in time, unfortunately we'll not be able to give words to all of them, but we'll also have some opportunity to participate in the plenary sessions. But concluding our roundtable, from my point of view, this is a very interesting section. We can safely say that in reality there are huge prospects for development of economic partnership and cooperation of Russian and African countries. And as we've heard today, many things depend on the work of the parliament members, and indeed we need to somewhere renew, somewhere to create from scratch the maybe non-existing as of the current moment legal framework based on which we could develop these relationships further on. Our countries, as it seems to me, firstly, this has been really deeply covered by our colleagues. Our countries are united and unified by mutual trust and openness to open to partnership. And as members of parliament, I think that first of all we need to do several quick steps in order to implement this potential in life. I think that's the overall result of our conference, and I would like to thank all of the participants who took part in it, who gave very interesting presentations. I think that it will all act for the benefit of Russian African cooperation. Thank you very much.